Usually when we talk about like a medical diagnosis or even just the process of healing from a physical injury, there's this underlying expectation of mechanical precision, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's very binary.
Right. Like you fall down, you break your arm, and the x-ray shows that jagged white line right across the bone.
hmm And the doctor just points at it and says, there it is. Broken or not broken.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
put it in a cast, you wait your 6 weeks, and the bone knits itself back together. And I think that's incredibly comforting because we, as human beings, desperately like things to be visible.
Oh, for sure. We want to categorize our pain neatly into these objective columns of healthy and unhealthy. It makes us feel in control.
Right, but then you step into the world of profound psychological trauma or severe neurodevelopmental impact, and suddenly, well, that x-ray machine is utterly useless.
Yeah, it really is. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky. I mean, it is the absolute definition of muddy waters.
Because, how do you take a photograph of a shattered sense of safety?
You can't.
Right. How do you isolate the exact physiological moment a human nervous system simply gives up?
Exactly. You can't put a fractured sense of self on a light box in a hospital and, point to the crack.
No, you really can't.
Trauma lives in the invisible spaces.
Yeah.
It's in the way the breath catches or in the hypervigilance or the way a shadow falling across a room suddenly feels like a literal life or death threat.
Which is exactly why the material we have stacked on the table for this deep dive is so incredibly compelling.
It really is.
So if you are tuning into this deep dive today, whether you're fascinated by how art intersects with severe trauma or you're just, looking for a profound new perspective on how human beings survive the unsurvivable, you are in the right place.
Because we are going to explore a project that found a way to map those muddy waters with absolute terrifying precision.
Yes, we are. We're looking at the lyrics, the deeply detailed liner notes, and the track-by-track breakdown of an 11-track conceptual audio project.
It's called Hard Limit, created by an artist named Ti-Fi.
And the mission of our time today is to unpack Ti-Fi's incredibly ambitious 5-year goal. It's a project documenting this harrowing, visceral journey from the absolute darkest corners of the sex trade all the way to active recovery and becoming a certified peer support worker.
And the structural conceit of the entire project is really what makes it so groundbreaking.
Yeah, tell us about that, because it's not just a standard memoir.
No, not at all. Ti-Fi didn't just write a memoir set to music, which is, the traditional route. They utilized the highly technical, unforgiving lexicon of audio engineering to explain their psychological state.
Which is brilliant.
It is. They take the clinical vocabulary of the recording studio concepts like clipping signals, dead acoustic spaces, high-fidelity mastering, and use them as precise one-to-one metaphors for dissociation, boundary violations, and healing.
It is a stunning framework. But before we step into the studio and start pulling these cables apart, we really need to do a quick empathy check for you, the listener.
Yes, definitely.
Because the source material we're looking at today covers some incredibly heavy, visceral realities.
Very heavy.
We will be discussing the severe dangers of the sex trade, the devastating reality of secondary trauma from the justice system, and direct references to the presence of child predators.
Plus periods of severe psychological isolation.
Yeah, it is dark and it is heavy, but I want to make this exceptionally clear right at the top. The ultimate destination of this deep dive and of Ti-Fi's journey is one of absolute triumph.
Truly, it's a story of reclaiming agency, of finding what the artist calls high-fidelity freedom.
Right, and ultimately reaching a hand back into the dark for others. So keep that in mind as we go.
Yeah, it serves as a blueprint for survival. But, like any blueprint, you have to examine the foundation first, even if it's fundamentally cracked and failing.
Which brings us to the beginning of the journey, track 1, titled Redlining.
So let's unpack the audio engineering concept of redlining first, because the brilliance of this metaphor rests entirely on how physical the hardware damage actually is.
Right, for anyone who hasn't been in a recording studio on a mixing board, you have a visual meter that shows the input of a signal, like the volume coming in.
Exactly. Yeah. And when that signal is healthy, it bounces nicely in the green zone.
Right, but if you push that volume too high, forcing too much input into the channel, the meter spikes past that safe threshold. It goes straight into the red zone.
And the signal distorts. It clips.
But it isn't just about getting a bad sound, right?
No, not at all. If you leave a signal in the red for too long, you permanently damage the physical equipment. You blow the speakers. You literally fry the circuitry.
The hardware itself experiences a catastrophic physical failure.
Yes. And Ti-Fi uses this mechanical reality to describe the absolute breaking point of their time in the sex trade.
It's such a visceral comparison.
In the writer's room notes for the project, they detail how their nervous system was completely overloaded. The text describes a life of hotel doors constantly closing, transactions made in the dark, and just this chaotic, endless, suffocating demand.
Yeah, there is a lyric that specifically points to that. It says, the toxic clients who push past the line in the sand, taking the control right out of my hand.
And the notes specifically mention CNC clients, consensual non-consent, who pushed far past the agreed-upon boundaries of the arrangement.
Okay, I get the audio metaphor here, but I struggle a bit with this fatalistic implication.
How so?
Well, if you blow a physical speaker by redlining it, it's permanently broken, right? You throw it away, it goes in the dumpster. So is Ti-Fi implying that the human nervous system is permanently broken here? That once you cross that threshold, you're just fundamentally ruined? Because that feels incredibly hopeless to me.
I see what you're saying, but that is the exact trap of clinical fatalism.
Mm.
And the sources actually push back against that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. What Ti-Fi is communicating isn't that the human body is disposable like a cheap speaker. They are highlighting the physiological reality of hyperarousal. When you are repeatedly subjected to non-consensual moments, when your boundaries are continuously broken in highly dangerous environments, like a stranger's hotel room, your nervous system gets stuck.
It gets stuck in the red.
Exactly. It stops being able to regulate down into the green. The amygdala, which is the fear center of the brain, stays perpetually in the red. The hardware is failing, not because the person is weak, but because the toxic input is simply too high.
Wow. Yeah, Ti-Fi describes trading their time and bodily autonomy just to survive, working the late shift just to stay alive.
The metaphor of redlining is crucial
Yeah.
because it differentiates this state from simple fatigue. I mean, we all get tired from working hard.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, this was an entire system experiencing toxic overload.
There's a line from the track that gave me absolute chills when I read it. It says, taking the damage and taking the hit like reminding a vocal until the speed could split.
Yeah, that's a heavy line.
It's this brutal realization that the body isn't a person anymore to these clients. It is just raw material being mined. It's being extracted from until it physically breaks apart.
Right.
And it makes me think of a vital piece of machinery, like a car engine running completely without oil.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Like, you can ignore the check engine light for a little while, right?
Yeah.
You can keep your foot pressed hard on the gas pedal, and the car is still technically moving forward, so you tell yourself, well, it's fine.
Well, it's really not fine.
No, because the friction inside those metal cylinders is building. The heat is compounding exponentially. And eventually, if you do not turn the key and kill the ignition, the engine block is literally going to melt into a solid piece of useless metal.
Exactly. And walking away for Ti-Fi wasn't just a casual career pivot. It was an emergency shutdown to save the machine.
Right.
In the liner notes, they say leaving the sex trade was a terrifying decision, specifically because it meant leaving the only survival mechanism they knew.
Right, it's what they relied on to live.
But they hit that realization. The cost of staying had become entirely fatal. The only way to stop the meter from redlining is to cut the power entirely.
But, and this is where the story gets really complicated, hitting the emergency stop button doesn't mean you are suddenly parked in a safe, brightly lit garage.
Unfortunately, no.
Because leaving the broader systemic danger of the trade actually propelled Ti-Fi directly into an acute, devastating personal violation.
Yeah, walking away from one danger left them incredibly vulnerable to another.
Right. So this track shifts the focus from the general kind of suffocating atmosphere of the trade to a very specific localized trauma. The second track is titled The Pirated Signal.
And the linguistics of that title are so important.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
A pirated signal implies theft. It implies a total loss of ownership over the self, an unauthorized distribution of something precious.
And the narrative laid out in the sources here is unbelievably heavy.
It really is.
Ti-Fi details a situation where someone who had initially hired them for their services turned around and treated them literally like currency. Right.
Ti-Fi was traded to 3 other men in exchange for meth.
Just unbelievable.
The lyrics are gut-wrenching. They say, handed over for a chemical high, watching the remnants of my dignity die. They write about being weighed against a crystalline spark and treated like a stolen master tape, traded away in the dark.
We really need to stop and look at that specific metaphor, a stolen master tape.
Yeah.
In audio recording, the master tape is the genesis point. It is the original, irreplaceable source from which every single subsequent copy is pressed.
Right, it's the most valuable piece of media in the studio.
Exactly. It holds the highest possible fidelity. So to have that stolen and then traded for drugs is the ultimate reduction of human value.
Yeah.
It causes a profound fracture in a person's core sense of self-worth. You are essentially being told by the external world that your humanity, your entire existence, is fungible. You are tradable for a synthetic escape. I just keep thinking, how does the human mind even begin to process that kind of devaluation? If your entire identity is suddenly reduced to stolen data, to a file passed across a dirty desk, where do you even put that psychologically?
It creates a state of deep cognitive dissonance. The brain desperately tries to reject the reality of being treated as an object, but the physical circumstances just constantly enforce it.
Right.
But the psychological horror of this specific event escalates even further. It wasn't just the profound degradation of the trade itself. The source text reveals a sickening twist in the narrative here.
Yeah, this part is incredibly dark. Ti-Fi describes the moment they discovered the true nature of the person who had just traded them. They look over and they see a computer monitor glowing in the dead of night. And on that screen is CSAM, child sexual abuse material.
Just horrific.
The buyer, the person who had orchestrated this entire horrific trade, was a child predator. Ti-Fi says the truth lit up in the dead of the night, uncovering a frequency completely warped by sin.
So now, the survivor is confronted not just with their own immediate visceral violation, but with proximity to profound systemic evil.
Right.
And what Ti-Fi does next is exactly what society, what every PSA tells every survivor they're supposed to do.
Yeah, they did everything, quote-unquote, right.
Exactly. They gathered the truth, they carried the trauma, and they stepped into the sterile, bureaucratic environment of a police precinct. They tried to put this monster on the official record.
They walked up to the microphone and tried to hit record.
Yes.
But the system absolutely refused to press the button. Ti-Fi brought the story of the trade and the twisted, illegal files they saw glowing on that monitor to the police, and the response from the institution. The case was closed due to insufficient evidence.
Unbelievable.
The officer delivered that line, shut the file, and the predator simply walked free.
We really have to analyze the concept of institutional betrayal or secondary trauma here. In the track breakdown, Ti-Fi explicitly states that the secondary trauma hit harder and deeper than the trade itself.
Wait, harder than being traded for meth? Because honestly, that seems almost impossible to comprehend. The physical danger of the trade feels so much more acute.
I know it sounds counterintuitive, but it's about the expectation of safety.
Okay, right.
When the initial trauma happens, it is perpetrated by a bad actor. A monster in the underground, as the lyrics say.
Yeah.
You expect violence from the dark.
Sure, you're on guard for it.
Exactly. But the justice system is supposed to be the safety net. It represents society's agreed-upon moral baseline.
Right.
So when a survivor comes to the system bleeding, holding the evidence of a monster, and the system looks at them, mutes their microphone, and essentially says, "We simply do not care," that is a betrayal that shatters reality.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The system essentially said that Ti-Fi's word, Ti-Fi's experience, and Ti-Fi's value held zero fidelity.
And the lyrics phrase it exactly like that. They say, the justice system let the static win. They left a hollow ringing inside my head.
It's chilling.
It is the chilling realization that society is perfectly comfortable letting the danger remain out there as long as it doesn't disturb the peace of the people who, quote-unquote, matter.
Right.
The abuser treated Ti-Fi like a pirated signal, and the police essentially confirmed that assessment by tossing the tape into the trash can.
And the silence of a closed file is deafening. It completely reinforces that devaluation. And that bureaucratic systemic betrayal didn't stay abstract. It immediately manifested into a literal physical abandonment.
Which brings us to track 3, dead air.
Right. Let's talk about dead air, because in broadcasting, dead air is the absolute worst-case scenario.
It really is. It's an unintended, terrifying interruption of the signal. It's a silence where there should absolutely be a connection.
And the picture painted by the sources for this track is incredibly stark. The lyrics go, the car door slammed, tires on the gravel, dumped in the middle of the park.
Yeah, Ti-Fi is physically thrown out of the vehicle into the freezing cold of a desolate park at night.
Completely alone.
Standing entirely alone, feeling the sharp gravel scraping under their shoes, watching the red taillights of a car fade out of sight into the dark. Ti-Fi describes it as an abrupt end to a terrifying ride, like a channel fader violently pushed to the side.
It is a sudden, total dropout in the stereo space.
Yeah.
It is the ultimate physical isolation, which perfectly echoes the institutional isolation they just experienced in the previous track. Ti-Fi has been dropped, completely erased. The signal has been severed.
Right.
When you are standing in a freezing park, miles from safety, your nervous system registers that as a literal threat to your life.
Yeah.
The cold, the dark, the gravel, these are all sensory inputs confirming that you are entirely alone and completely unprotected.
And I love this part. Right here in the dead center of this freezing park, we get this incredible, enthusiastic counter melody.
Yes.
This is where the lifeline comes in. Because Ti-Fi reaches into their pocket. They have a cell phone.
Thank goodness.
The screen lights up the dark, what the lyrics call a faint signal breaking through the dead air. Ti-Fi dials a number. They call a male partner they were seeing at the time. It is a midnight panic call.
And what happens next is profound subversion of the abandonment narrative. It rewrites the entire script of the night.
It really does. The
Yeah.
partner answers the phone, but it is the partner's wife who gets into the car.
Yes.
It is the wife who drives out into the freezing, damp grass of the park in the middle of the night to find Ti-Fi. The lyrics call it a polyamorous safety net catching the fall.
This is a crucial moment to discuss what chosen family actually looks like in practice, particularly for people who exist outside traditional structures.
Oh, absolutely.
Look at the highly specific details Ti-Fi emphasizes in the lyrics. The wife pulls up, the headlights cut through the silence, the heater was running and the doors unlocked. No judgment given.
No questions asked, no demanding to know how they got there, no lecturing about the danger of the trade, just an open door and warm air.
And that lack of judgment is the medicine.
Wow, yeah.
When a survivor has just been told by the trade that they are a commodity and told by the police that they are a nuisance, what their nervous system desperately requires is unconditional reception.
Right.
This rescue proves to Ti-Fi that not every human connection ends in a severed tie. It was an auxiliary input that kept the audio running when the main line was cut. The rescue, Ti-Fi says, was the clearest sound I know.
I love that. The clearest sound I know. They sat in the passenger seat, feeling the heavy frost outside the glass, just trying to breathe, letting the heavy panic leave before the break of day. The dead air was gone.
It was.
And we see this so often with trauma surviving. The immediate physical danger of the freezing park does not mean the mind is suddenly safe from what happened back in that police precinct.
No, it really doesn't.
You might be physically warm in a car, but your brain is still stuck in the precinct.
The body keeps the score, and the mind constantly records the tape. When profound trauma is ignored by the authorities, when it is denied external validation and justice, it has nowhere to go but inward. The energy of that trauma doesn't just evaporate, it turns entirely on the host.
Which introduces us to the most chaotic and self-destructive phase of this deep dive. Track 4 is called the feedback loop, and it covers a post-traumatic episode that lasted for agonizing months.
And if you think about a feedback loop in audio engineering, it is a perfect representation of internalized trauma.
Tell us how that works.
Well, feedback happens when a microphone picks up the sound from a speaker, sends it back through the amplifier, which sends it back out the speaker, which the microphone picks up again.
Right, it's a loop.
It loops infinitely, compounding in volume and distortion until it becomes an agonizing high-pitched scream that literally shatters your ears.
Think about the last time you were at a concert or even just like a school assembly and someone walked onto a stage with a live mic and got a little too close to the monitors.
Oh yeah, that sound.
That sudden shriek. The whole audience physically recoils and covers their ears. It grows louder and more distorted, and it literally feeds on its own energy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now map that onto the human psyche. Ti-Fi writes about being caught in an inescapable delay pedal, repeating the hardest, most humiliating moments over and over in their head.
Just constantly looping.
Right. The physical trauma of the trade, the horror of discovering the child predator, the cold rejection by the police. These memories were bouncing off the walls of their own mind.
Wow.
And because there was no justice, no external resolution to act as an acoustic dampener, the volume just kept going up.
And the result of that unbearable internal pressure was a massive public breakdown. Ti-Fi says, I dismantled my own life, typing out the words and hitting send, causing a massive self-inflicted public humiliation.
Yeah.
They systematically walked away from their jobs. They essentially torched their own professional and social network online. The lyrics say, I pushed over the structures and watched them all fall, the digital footprint of a mind breaking down.
And we really have to ask why. From a psychological standpoint, self-sabotage of this magnitude is almost always an attempt to externalize an internal agony.
Okay, making the invisible visible.
Exactly. If the pain inside your head is intolerable and invisible, dismantling your real physical life makes the destruction visible. It gives the pain a shape that other people are forced to look at. It's a scream.
Right.
But the tragic irony of a feedback loop is that the louder you scream, the more people cover their ears and walk away. It isolates the survivor even further.
And the sources confirm that exactly. The online friends, the colleagues, they all stepped back. They were, according to the notes, unable or unwilling to handle the noise.
Yeah, it's too much for people.
The solo track became deafening. It was an amplifier feeding back the darkest delay. And here's the thing about a live mic screaming in a feedback loop. You cannot fix it by gently adjusting the equalizer. The only way to stop it is to violently yank the plug right out of the wall.
Which is precisely the action Ti-Fi took. The public breakdown was the absolute climax of the noise. The liner notes state that this devastating episode was a catalyst.
A catalyst for what?
While tearing down the structures while waiting for a justice that the world was never going to deliver, forced a massive change in direction. It forced a complete, total silence.
Because if public explosion only creates more damage, the nervous system realizes noise isn't working. It resorts to the only other option available, absolute, total quarantine. Which brings us to track 5, the soundproof room.
This represents a severe, dramatic pivot. From a public, chaotic dismantling of a life to total physical and psychological quarantine.
And the narrative here doesn't just cover a few rough weeks. We are talking about a period of 2 full years.
2 years.
2 years of complete self-imposed isolation. The lyrics paint an incredibly claustrophobic picture. The door locked, the blinds drawn. I silenced the inputs and turned off the phone.
Wow.
Ti-Fi describes building padded walls to quarantine from the profound shame and judgment of the outside world. They describe just breathing stale, motionless air, watching the seasons pass through the glass of a locked window.
And the metaphor of the soundproof room and anechoic chamber is highly accurate for deep depressive isolation.
Explain the anechoic chamber for us.
So an anechoic chamber is a room designed to completely absorb all echoes. No signal gets in, no signal gets out. It is absolute deadness.
Right.
When the external world has proven to be a source of profound danger, both physically in the trade and socially during a public breakdown, the nervous system decides that the only possible defense is a fortress of total solitude.
That makes complete sense.
If I do not broadcast the signal, no one can pirate it.
Yeah.
If I do not speak, no one can mute me.
But I really want to explore the reality of anechoic chambers for a second. Because in real life, if you put a human being in a perfectly soundproof room, they start to hallucinate within minutes.
Oh, absolutely.
Because when the brain is deprived of external input, it starts generating its own noise. You start hearing your own heartbeat like a bass drum. You hear your blood rushing. Does a psychological sanctuary eventually just turn into a prison?
That is the exact tension Ti-Fi wrestles with in this track. And it's a brilliant insight. There's a crucial line in the writer's room. Notes, the safety of nothing is a dangerous trap.
The safety of nothing? Wow.
Initially, the soundproof room is a sanctuary. It absorbs the excruciating echoes of public shame and stops the immediate psychological bleeding. It keeps the survivor alive when they're at their most fragile.
Right.
But, as the notes clearly state, containment is not healing. Existing in static is not the same thing as being cured.
The lyrics say, just existing in the static, waiting for the courage to open the door. But the air in the chamber was getting too thin.
Because human beings are fundamentally not designed to exist in a vacuum. We need resonance.
Yeah.
We need connection. The padded walls protect you from the sharp edges of the world, yes. But they also slowly suffocate you.
You run out of air.
To heal, to actually move forward,
Yeah.
you have to risk input again. You have to risk hearing a sound.
You cannot stay in the room forever. Eventually, you have to unlock that heavy door. You have to open it up, step back out, and look at the completely ruined studio floor.
Yeah.
And this brings us to the turning point of the entire arc. The moment the momentum shifts. Track 6 is splicing the tape.
This is where the narrative shifts from passive survival, just, taking the hits and hiding, to active, intentional recovery.
It is the moment of stepping out of the isolation and actually assessing the damage. Ti-Fi looks at the scattered, ruined pieces of their former life.
Right.
The career they burned down in the feedback loop, the trauma of the trade, the closed police files scattered everywhere. The original recording of their life was ruined. But instead of despairing over the mess, Ti-Fi says, I picked up the razor.
Yes.
They make the active, conscious decision to edit a new life out of the remnants of the old one. I am slicing tape and changing the beat, building a new life, standing on my own 2 feet.
And the psychological shift here is the most profound moment in the deep dive. We were talking about the reclamation of agency.
Yeah, that's huge.
Think about it. Throughout the entire first half of the project, Pi-Fi is the victim of the arrangement. They are the one being overloaded by the clients. They are the one traded for drugs. They are abandoned in the park, drowning in the noise. They are acted upon.
Right.
But the exact moment you pick up the razor blade to splice the audio tape, you are no longer the victim. You are the audio engineer.
Oh, I love that.
You are the one holding the blade, deciding what makes it onto the final track and what gets cut.
It reminds me so much of the Japanese kintsugi artists.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of looking at a shattered piece of pottery and throwing the broken fragments in the trash, they carefully piece them back together using lacquer dusted with powdered gold.
Right, emphasizing the cracks.
The philosophy is that the breakage and the repair are part of the history of the object, rather than something to be disguised or thrown away.
That is a perfect parallel. Ti-Fi isn't pretending the tape was never damaged. They aren't trying to magically erase the past.
Yeah.
They are picking up the literal, physical fragments of their life, carefully inspecting them, and choosing exactly which fragments to keep and which to sweep onto the cutting room floor.
Yeah, the lyrics say, cutting out the dead air, the toxic years, and the static. They're intentionally removing the fears.
This is the exact moment, according to the notes, that the 5-year goal truly takes shape. The goal to rebuild.
But, part of claiming that agency as the engineer is realizing that you have the power to protect the new tape you are splicing together.
Absolutely.
If you just rebuilt it and left the studio door open, someone will just walk in and ruin it again. You are no longer obligated to let anyone into the room who might damage the equipment, which thrusts us right into track 7, the master fader.
Right.
Because once you splice the new tape together, you have to protect it so fiercely that it never ever gets pirated again.
In audio engineering, the master fader is the final control on a mixing console. It dictates the overall output level of everything happening on the board. It is the ultimate, absolute gatekeeper of the sound.
And this track is all about pulling up the chair and taking the seat at that mixing board. The lyrics here are so fierce. They are unapologetic, anthemic declarations of boundaries.
I love the lyrics on this track.
Ti-Fi sings, I drew a heavy line right across the ground. No more toxic voices telling me what to do. I built a boundary they can never break through.
Yeah.
It is about ensuring that the abusers, the toxic elements, the people who introduce pain, they're permanently locked out of the studio.
We need to unpack the concept of the hard limit here, which is actually the title of the entire album.
Yes, let's do that.
A hard limiter in audio is a dynamic effect that absolutely prevents an audio signal from passing a specific threshold. It doesn't just turn the volume down, it acts as an impenetrable brick wall.
A brick wall.
Wow. Psychologically, establishing a hard limit is a conscious, daily refusal to yield to the hands that took from you. Ti-Fi says, I control the levels and I set the gain, refusing to let them introduce the pain. It is a fierce defense of the self.
The old ghosts are permanently muted. I love that imagery. The perimeter is secure.
It is.
But let's play this out realistically. You've locked the toxic people out. You've set the brick wall boundary. The perimeter is secure. But that is just keeping the bad out. What do you actually do with the empty space inside? Defense is not the same thing as growth.
No, it's not. That is the essential question of recovery, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can build a fortress, but you still have to live inside it.
Exactly. And that takes us to track 8, Finding the Pitch, because rebuilding a life inside that secure studio is a brutal daily grind.
Yes, it is.
It's not a magical overnight fix where you set a boundary and suddenly you're cured and perfectly happy.
The lyrics in track 8 detail the grueling effort of active recovery. It talks about untangling the wires of the past, waking up early, going to therapy, and doing the heavy lifting.
Right.
The act of recovery is a steep and conscious climb, rebuilding the studio one cable at a time. This is where the romantic idea of healing gives way to the sweat and tears of actual psychological work.
Ti-Fi describes it as calibrating a compass inside the chest, unlearning the habits that kept me in place, giving my own heart a little bit of grace. But how hard is that unlearning process? If your brain has been wired for redlining for years, how do you even begin to untangle those wires?
Oh, it is exhausting.
Yeah.
Calibration is the perfect word here. When a person has lived in a state of constant redlining, their baseline for what feels normal is heavily distorted.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Your nervous system thinks chaos is the standard pitch. If things are quiet, your brain panics because it assumes a predator is hiding.
Wow.
The active work of healing and therapy is unlearning those deep-seated survival mechanisms. It's brushing off years of rust, as the lyrics say, and slowly tuning the acoustic strings to play new song.
Right.
You have to dial the EQ, the equalizer, to adjust the frequencies. You are literally rewiring neural pathways so that your brain can accept safety without triggering an alarm.
Finding the note, breaking the chain, hearing the music, escaping the pain. And all of those early morning therapy sessions, all that heavy lifting of untangling wires and dialing the EQ, it eventually yields a pure signal, which leads to the emotional peak of the project, track 9, High Fidelity.
High fidelity. In the narrative arc of this deep dive, this is the climax of personal freedom.
The lyrics in track 9 are bathed in this pure, vibrant joy that we haven't seen anywhere else in the project. The air is clear, no more static in the mind, entirely free to choose the direction.
Yeah,
The heavy, distorted, suffocating days of the sex trade, the crushing noise of the feedback loop, the stale air of the soundproof room, they are done.
they're gone.
The pass is firmly behind the hard limit boundary line. Ti-Fi is stepping into a bright, wide-open horizon without any dread.
Look closely at the specific audio metaphor used here, like listening to a lossless file. Every single note is bright and completely clean.
What exactly is a lossless file?
A lossless audio file contains all the original data perfectly preserved. There is no compression, no data lost or stripped away, just to make the file smaller and easier to transmit. It implies a state of absolute wholeness.
Think about it this way. Imagine you've spent 10 years listening to your absolute favorite song, but you've only ever heard it on a degraded, staticky cassette tape that's been left melting in a hot car.
Oh yeah, awful sound.
It wiggles, the sound drops out, the pitch bends and warps, but because that's all you've ever heard, you think that is just how the song is supposed to sound.
Right.
And then one day, someone sits you down, puts a pair of high-end, perfect studio headphones on you, and plays the uncompressed, lossless digital file.
That's a revelation.
An air is so clear, you hear instruments in the background you never even knew existed. The fear is gone. You are, as the track says, celebrating the survivor inside of me like a perfect sine wave vibrating completely free.
It's a beautiful, triumphant climax. The mix is incredibly warm. The tempo is exactly where it should be. No clipping, no dropouts, no dead air, just a pure signal pushing forward. The survivor has achieved total clarity.
They really have.
But if we connect this back to the bigger picture, to the specific 5-year goal mentioned at the very beginning of our time today, personal freedom isn't the final track on the album.
No, it is not. Personal freedom is a beautiful achievement, but Ti-Fi's journey doesn't end with simply saving themselves, locking the studio door, and walking off into the sunset alone.
No.
The energy turns outward. And that brings us to track 10, Sympathetic Resonance, and the bonus epilogue track, The Clean Master. This is the core mission realized.
Sympathetic resonance represents the ultimate actualization of the project. In acoustics, sympathetic resonance is a fascinating physical phenomenon. It happens when a vibrating string or object forces another string into vibrational motion, simply because they share the same harmonic frequency.
So like one string sings its note and the string next to it, without ever being touched or plucked, starts vibrating and singing along because the frequency travels through the air.
Exactly. Ti-Fi is using this physical law of sound to describe the act of peer support.
Ah, I see.
Having reached safety, having done the grueling work of finding high fidelity, Ti-Fi is reaching a hand back into the dark for other survivors who are still trapped in the redlining of the trade or still suffocating in the dead air of closed police files.
The lyrics in this track speak directly, almost intimately, to those who are still struggling. I see you walking the edge of the dangerous trade. I know the weight of the secrets that you keep.
Yeah.
Ti-Fi is telling them the shame doesn't have to keep you locked inside. You don't need a soundproof room to hide.
This is the driving factor behind Ti-Fi training and certifying as a peer support worker to join an agency.
Right, the 5-year goal.
Yes. They are taking your lived history, the horrific redlining, the betrayal of the pirated signal, the madness of the feedback loop, and using it as a map. By openly sharing the frequency of hope, Ti-Fi creates a sympathetic resonance. The goal is to prove to other survivors that they are not a lost, pirated signal, so no one has to navigate the empty, terrifying map alone.
We can share the burden of the painful history, like sympathetic resonance, setting the frequency free.
It's about building a community where survivors stand together, bringing all the disparate, broken instruments into the same band so they can resonate together.
And then the deep dive concludes with the bonus track, Track 11, the clean master.
The clean master serves as the reflective epilogue.
Yeah.
It is the quiet moment of sitting at the board and looking back at the entire reel of tape you just mixed.
It is such a triumphant, grounded look back. Ti-Fi acknowledges every single scratch on the tape, every dropout, every terrifying choice they had to make.
Yeah?
They say, I look at the waveforms of where I have been, seeing the beauty where the distortion had been. The record is pressed, the grooves are deep and secure.
It is the profound, undeniable realization that a human being can be broken down, overloaded, traded for chemicals, abandoned in a freezing park, ignored by the very justice system meant to protect them, and humiliated publicly,
Yeah.
and yet still emerge entirely whole, entirely free,
Right.
and entirely in control of their own destiny.
The master is finished, the signal is pure, the record is gold. Wow, what a monumental journey.
It truly is. The way the audio engineering metaphor serves as a blueprint for human survival is not just an artistic choice for a music project. It's a profoundly effective psychological framework for rebuilding a shattered mind.
If you are listening to this right now, I want you to think about the incredible power of that framework. We've traced this intense path from the catastrophic system failure of redlining through the visceral, crushing betrayal of the pirated signal and the dead air of abandonment. We watched a mind tear itself apart in a feedback loop, lock itself in a soundproof room for 2 years, and finally find the strength to pick up the razor blade, splice the tape, push up the master fader, and dial in the pitch until the signal achieved high fidelity and sympathetic resonance.
It is a powerful reminder that containment is not healing, and that true power comes from taking the seat at the mixing board of your own life.
And that leaves me with one final thought for you, the listener, to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. Ti-Fi had to spend 2 long, suffocating years in a soundproof room before realizing that hiding isn't healing, and that the only way to survive was to become the active engineer of their own story. So look at your own life. What toxic frequencies or dead air are you allowing to play on a loop, and what would happen tomorrow if you finally decided to push up your own master fader and permanently cut the static?